On the last Saturday of August in 1974, at the Madison County Fair in northeastern Nebraska, a 17-year-old boy named Tommy Wescott walked up to the microphone in front of a packed tent and said something that stopped the whole crowd cold. He didn't say it smoothly. He stood there, face burning red, fingers white around the microphone stand, and forced the words out one at a time. "My name is Tommy Wescott," he said, "and I want to be an auctioneer." 1 second of silence, then someone laughed, then someone else. Within 30 seconds, 200 people were laughing at a stuttering boy who had just announced he wanted to master the fastest, most fluid form of human speech ever invented, the one profession in the world that depends entirely on a voice that never stops, never stumbles, never gets stuck. The loudest laugh came from the front row, a big man, 6'3", 240 pounds, gold watch, booming voice that carried over everyone else's, Gerald Hutchins, the richest farmer in Madison County, over 2,000 acres, equipment worth more than most families would earn in a decade. When Gerald Hutchins spoke, the county listened. "Son," Gerald said, still laughing, "that's the funniest thing I've heard all year. You might as well say you want to be a singing telegram." More laughter. Gerald's friends joined in enthusiastically. Tommy's mother, in the third row, looked like she wanted to disappear into the earth. His father, Earl Wescott, stared straight ahead, jaw tight, saying nothing. Tommy stood at that microphone and felt every second of it, the heat, the laughter, the weight of 200 people all thinking the same thing. Every instinct told him to walk off that stage and never speak of this again. Instead, he leaned forward. "I'm going to be the best auctioneer in Nebraska," he said, "and someday, Mr. Hutchins, I'm going to sell something of yours." He set down the microphone and walked off to scattered, confused applause. The talent competition moved on to a girl who could yodel, but Tommy Wescott never forgot that moment, and neither did Gerald Hutchins. Now let me tell you about Tommy, because this story only makes sense if you understand what he was really fighting against. Thomas James Wescott was born in 1957 in Norfolk, Nebraska, only child of Earl and Dorothy Wescott. Earl farmed 160 acres and worked part-time at the grain elevator. Dorothy was a secretary at the county courthouse. Solid people, honest, the kind of family that doesn't show up in history books but keeps a county running. Tommy started stuttering when he was 4. Nobody knew why. The doctor said many children grew out of it. Tommy didn't. It got worse as he got older, especially under pressure, especially when silence was waiting for him to fill it. School was a different kind of cruelty every day. Teachers called on him to watch him struggle. Other kids imitated him. They walked away. Mid-sentence, they finished his words in mocking voices. Tommy learned to be quiet, to nod instead of speak, to keep his thoughts locked inside where nobody could use them against him. But there was one place where Tommy Wescott came alive, the auction yard. His father took him starting at age 6. Tommy would sit in the wooden bleachers and watch the auctioneer work the crowd, the rhythm, the speed, the way a single voice could take a room full of stubborn, silent men and turn them into bidders. It was the most powerful thing he had ever seen. He didn't understand at first why it called to him. Here was a profession built entirely on speaking, and he could barely get through a sentence. But then he noticed something. The auctioneers didn't talk the way people talked in normal life. They had a rhythm, a musical pattern that carried you forward. It wasn't conversation, it was performance, almost like singing. And Tommy discovered, alone in his room, practicing in front of a mirror, and that when he fell into that rhythm, something happened. The stutter disappeared. $5.50, now 10, $10 bid, now 15, 15, give me 15. The words flowed like water, no jamming, no wall, no humiliation, just sound moving forward, the rhythm carrying it like a current. It was the closest thing to a miracle Tommy Wescott had ever felt. After the county fair disaster, Tommy went home and didn't speak to anyone for 3 days. On the 4th day, Earl knocked on his bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. "You still want to be an auctioneer?" Earl asked. "Everyone thinks it's stupid." "I didn't ask what everyone thinks. I asked what you want." "Yes, sir. I want to be an auctioneer." Earl nodded. "Then we need to find you a school. There's one in Kansas City, 3 weeks, costs about $400. Tommy knew what that meant. $400 was the tractor repair they'd been putting off. It was Christmas and birthdays combined. Money they didn't have to spare. Dad, we can't, let me worry about what we can afford. Earl stood up. You got laughed at in front of the whole county. Most people, that would break them. You stood up and told Gerald Hutchkins you'd sell something of his someday. A rare smile crossed his weathered face. That took more guts than most men have. 2 weeks later, Tommy Wescott boarded a Greyhound bus to Kansas City with $400 of his family's money in his pocket and more fear in his chest than he had ever known. The Missouri Auction School was a converted warehouse near the stockyards. It smelled like cattle and sawdust. 30 students, ranging from 17 to 55. The instructor was Virgil Clement, 62 years old, calling auctions since 1936. A voice like a diesel engine wrapped in velvet. He had seen every kind of student. He had never seen anyone like Tommy Wescott. On the first day, every student stepped up to the practice podium. When Tommy's turn came, the familiar block rose in his throat like a fist. Nothing came out. Someone whispered. Someone shifted in their seat. Tommy closed his eyes. He thought about the auction yard. He thought about Gerald laughing. And then he started. $5.50, now 10, $10 bid, now 15, 15, give me 15. Not fast, not perfect, but fluid. No stutter, no blocks, just words flowing one after the other. Virgil Clement walked up and studied Tommy for a long moment. How long you been stuttering, son? All my life, sir. But you don't stutter when you chant? No, sir, not usually. Virgil turned to the class. Pay attention. I've been teaching auction for 23 years, and I've never seen this. Most people get worse under pressure. This young man's brain built a workaround all by itself. He looked back at Tommy. That's not a disability, son. That's engineering. Tommy was the worst student in class for the first week, average in the second, not the best at graduation. But he had a certificate. He was an auctioneer. Now he just had to prove he could work. He came home to a county that hadn't changed its opinion. Gerald Hutchkins had made sure of that. Word had spread about the stuttering kid who went to auction school in Kansas City. Most people thought it was touching in a hopeless sort of way. The first auction Tommy tried to work was a small estate sale, an old widow's household goods, nothing glamorous. He called the auction house in Norfolk, asked for a chance. The owner, Pete Dawson, agreed. 2 days later, Pete called back, I'm sorry, son, I can't use you. What happened? Gerald Hutchkins came into my office, said if I let a stuttering kid embarrass himself at one of my auctions, he'd take every piece of his business elsewhere. Tommy felt the shame rise hot in his chest, then something colder and more durable underneath it. He hung up the phone, sat alone for an hour, and then did the one thing Gerald Hutchkins hadn't. Counted on. He went looking for Frank Oberlin. Let me tell you about Frank Oberlin. Because without Frank, this story ends in a very different place. Frank was 71 years old and had been calling auctions for 46 years, starting at 25 from the back of a wagon with nothing but his voice and a wooden gavel. He called auctions through the Depression, through the war, through boom years and bust. He had seen everything the profession had to offer. 3 years earlier, a stroke had ended his career. Partially paralyzed on his right side. He could still talk, still think sharply, but he couldn't stand at a podium for hours anymore. He lived alone in a small house on the edge of Norfolk, reading auction catalogs, listening to livestock reports, and remembering. Tommy knocked on his door in October 1975. Frank opened it, looked Tommy up and down, and said, I know who you are, the stuttering kid Gerald Hutchkins has been telling everyone. He paused. Come inside. I want to hear you chant. For an hour, Tommy demonstrated everything he'd learned. Frank sat in his armchair, eyes closed, occasionally raising a hand. Again, slower. Where's your breath coming from? When Tommy finished, Frank was quiet for a long time. You know why auctioneering is hard? He finally asked. But because it's fast. Fast is easy once you practice. Auctioneering is hard because it's intimate. You're reading people, watching eyes and hands, having a conversation with 50 people at once, and every one of them thinks you're talking directly to them. Frank leaned forward. Your stutter. It might actually be an advantage. An advantage? People remember you. In a world full of auctioneers who all sound the same, you're different. And when you hit that rhythm and the words flow, they think, that kid worked hard to get here. They root for you. He paused. But Gerald Hutchkins is a bully with money, been one his whole life. I've known men like him for 50 years. You know what always happens eventually? What? The bill comes due. It always does. The question is whether you'll be ready. Frank Oberlin took Tommy on as his apprentice that day. For the next 3 years, Tommy learned everything the old man knew. Not just the mechanics and the art, the psychology, how to read a crowd like a poker player reads a table, how to sense when a bidder has more to give, how to control a room's energy, speeding up when excitement builds, slowing when attention flags, and he practiced every day, alone in Frank's garage, chanting into an old microphone until his voice was raw, building the rhythm deeper and deeper into his bones until it wasn't something he did, but something he simply was. The day will come, Frank told him, when everything depends on your voice, when you're exhausted, emotional, when the whole world is watching, and on that day, the rhythm has to be so deep in your bones that nothing can shake it loose. By 1978, Tommy was 21, and things were beginning to shift. Frank was getting weaker, his health was failing, and he knew it. I've got one more big auction in me, Frank said one evening. The Henderson estate sale in September, 400 acres, full equipment line. It's going to be my last one. He looked at his apprentice. But I'm not worried, because you're going to take over the business. What if Gerald Hutchkins tries to stop me? Let him try. Frank smiled, thin and fierce. I've got something Gerald doesn't. 50 years of being decent to people. You'd be amazed how many favors that buys. The Henderson auction that September was Frank Oberlin's masterpiece. 4 hours of calling, prices exceeding every projection. And at the end, at the podium, one final time, he made his announcement. I'm retiring. My health won't let me continue, but I'm passing the business to Tommy Wescott. He looked out at the crowd. I stake my reputation on it. Tommy Wescott is the best young auctioneer in Nebraska. Watch him work. Judge him by his results. Those were Frank Oberlin's last public words. He died 4 months later, in January 1979. Tommy was at his bedside. Don't let them beat you, Frank said near the end. And when Gerald Hutchkins's bill comes due, and it will, you be ready. The years between 1979 and 1982 were years of war. Gerald Hutchkins did everything he could to kill Tommy's business, called in favors, spread stories, threatened farmers who considered using Tommy's services, no credit at his bank, no fair prices at his elevator, no welcome at his co-op. Some people caved. Tommy couldn't blame them. Real power has real teeth, but Frank had been right about the favors. Dozens of families across Madison and surrounding counties owed Frank something, a kindness during a hard year, a fair deal when they needed one. Many of those families decided that honoring Frank's memory meant giving Tommy a chance. Tommy drove hundreds of miles for small auctions. That barely covered the gas. He took jobs that paid almost nothing just to build the record. He practiced his chant until he could deliver it half asleep, and slowly, steadily, without anyone noticing the exact moment it happened, he got good. By 1980, Tommy Wescott was the busiest auctioneer in the region, not because people pitied him. That sympathy had worn off long ago, because he was genuinely, undeniably good, because his chant, when he found his rhythm, was hypnotic, a rolling, relentless flow of words that drove prices higher than anyone expected. The stutter was still there in conversation. It always would be. But behind the microphone, Tommy Wescott was something else entirely. Now let me tell you about the farm crisis, because without it, this story ends differently. The agricultural boom of the 1970s collapsed almost overnight. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates to fight inflation. By 1981, the prime rate hit 21.5%. Grain prices fell through the floor. Land values, which had tripled in a decade, began dropping fast. Farmers who had borrowed heavily suddenly found themselves owing more than everything they owned was worth. Foreclosures came like a flood. In Madison County, auction notices on mailboxes, the sign of a farm going under, stopped being news. Gerald Hutchkins had been one of the biggest borrowers in the county. During the boom, he had expanded aggressively. More land, more equipment, more grain storage, always financed, always leveraged, always with the confidence of a man who had never truly lost. He owed over $2 million to creditors in Omaha. His assets, at current market values, were worth maybe half that. He tried everything, called in every favor, pressured banks, threatened, pleaded, nothing worked. In March of 1982, the Federal Land Bank filed foreclosure proceedings. The judge ordered full liquidation. An auction would be held to satisfy the debts. Someone would have to call it. Tommy Wescott was at his kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon in April when the phone rang. "Mr. Wescott, this is Richard Carpenter from the Federal Land Bank in Omaha. We're handling the Hutchkins foreclosure." Tommy set down his coffee cup very slowly. "We need an auctioneer for the liquidation sale. Over 2,000 acres, full equipment line, livestock, buildings. We've approached 2 other auctioneers. Both declined." "Why?" "Mr. Hutchkins has been making calls, warning people that working this auction would damage their careers." A pause. "Our research shows you're the most experienced auctioneer in the region with the strongest record for maximizing sale prices. And frankly, given your history with Mr. Hutchkins, we thought you might be interested." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. 8 years. 8 years since the county fair. 8 years since he'd stood at that microphone and made a promise in front of 200 laughing people. "I'm interested," he said, "but I want you to understand something. I'm going to run a fair auction. Whatever personal history exists between me and Mr. Hutchkins will not affect my professionalism. Every item gets its best price. Every bidder gets a fair chance. That's the only way I work." Richard Carpenter paused. "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. The auction is May 15th. I'll be there." Tommy hung up. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from something that felt, if he was honest with himself, like destiny arriving exactly on schedule. "The bill comes due," Frank had said. "It always does." He woke at 4 in the morning on May 15th, 1982, showered, shaved, put on his best suit, the dark vest, the white shirt. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror. $5.50, now 10, $10 bid, now 15, 15, give me 15. The words flowed. The rhythm was there. 8 years of practice, thousands of hours, all of it built and stacked for this morning. He drove to the Hutchkins property as the sun came up over the flat. Nebraska land. He wanted to arrive before anyone, walk the grounds, know every item in his bones before a single bidder showed up. The Hutchkins farm was enormous, 2,000 acres stretching to every horizon, a massive barn complex, a farmhouse that looked more like a mansion, combines tractors, trucks, implements lined up in long rows, all of it about to become somebody else's. Tommy was setting up his podium when a truck pulled into the drive. Gerald Hutchkins climbed out. 8 years had done their work on Gerald. He was thinner, grayer. His posture carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The look of a man who has stopped being the biggest thing in the room and is still figuring out who he is without that. The booming voice was quieter now, rougher. He walked up and stood there a moment without speaking. "So," he finally said, "the stuttering boy. Mr. Hutchkins, you must be enjoying this." Tommy considered that honestly, then, "No, sir, I'm not enjoying this. I never wanted to see anyone lose their farm. I just want to do my job." "Your job." Gerald laughed, hollow, nothing like the big sound from the county fair. "You know what my job used to be? Running the biggest operation in Madison County, employing 30 people. He gestured at the equipment lined up in the morning light. "Now I'm watching a stuttering kid sell everything I built." "I am sorry for what you're going through," Tommy said. "Truly." Gerald stared at him. "Are you? After everything I did to you?" "Yes, sir. Because I know what it's like to have everyone laugh at you, to be told you're worthless, to have someone try to make sure you fail." Tommy met his eyes. "I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even you." Something moved across Gerald Hutchkins' face, not quite softening, more like a door opening that had been locked a very long time. He looked at Tommy the way a man looks at something he has been wrong about for years. "You're a better man than I am," Gerald said, quietly. "I'm being professional," Tommy said. This auction is going to be fair. Every item gets the best price the market will bear. That's my job, and I'm going to do it right." Gerald nodded once. Then he turned and walked back toward the farmhouse without another word. By 10 o'clock, over 300 people had gathered, buyers looking for bargains, neighbors paying a quiet kind of respect. Some faces Tommy recognized, people who had come to watch Gerald Hutchkins fall the same way Gerald had once watched a 17-year-old boy burn with shame. Tommy stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the crowd. In the front row, Gerald Hutchkins and his wife sat side by side. Gerald's face was expressionless. His wife's eyes were red. Tommy took one breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hutchkins Estate Auction. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get started." And then he began. Starting bid, lot number 1, 1978, John Deere 444. Showroom condition. Who will give me 20,000? 20, 20, 20, now 25. Give me 25, $25 bid, now 30. The words flowed like they had been flowing all his life. No stutter, no wall, just the pure, rolling, unstoppable rhythm that Frank Oberlin had helped him build from scratch in a garage in Norfolk, Nebraska. The rhythm that had transformed a boy who couldn't say his own name into the finest auctioneer in the state. He called that auction for 6 hours of chanting, reading the crowd, watching eyes and hands, driving prices, 6 hours of watching Gerald Hutchkins sit in the front row while piece after piece of a lifetime passed into other hands. Tommy didn't look at Gerald with satisfaction. He didn't look at him with triumph. He looked at him with something closer to understanding. He knew what it felt like to have people watch you lose. He worked harder than he had ever worked, not to humiliate, not to settle a score, because Frank Oberlin had taught him that the best thing you could ever be was completely, relentlessly professional, because that was the one thing nobody could mock and nobody could take away. When the last lot closed, the total exceeded every projection the Federal Land Bank had set. The creditors would be satisfied in full. There would even be a small amount left over for Gerald, not enough to start over, but enough to land somewhere soft. Tommy stepped back from the podium, suit soaked through, voice raw, legs aching, people pressing forward to shake his hand. He looked for Gerald. Gerald was walking toward him through the dispersing crowd, his wife beside him. They stood face to face, the man who had laughed and the man who had been laughed at. 8 years between that moment at the county fair and this one. Gerald extended his hand. "That was the finest auction I've ever seen," he said. His voice was steady, but only barely. "You were not kidding about being professional." Tommy shook his hand. "I'm sorry it had to be your auction, Mr. Hutchkins." "I'm not." Gerald looked down a moment, then back up. "I spent years being cruel to you, and you paid me back with dignity. That's—" His voice caught. "That's not something I would have done. It's what Frank Oberlin taught me. He said being decent doesn't pay off right away. Sometimes it takes decades, but it always pays off." Gerald was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was very low. "That day at the county fair, when I laughed at you, I've thought about that day more than you know. I thought I was being funny. I thought I was putting a stupid kid in his place." He stopped. "I didn't know I was watching the bravest person I'd ever meet." He took his wife's arm and walked away through the rows of empty equipment. Tommy never saw him again. Let me tell you what happened after, because the story doesn't end with one auction and one apology. Tommy Wescott went on to call over 4,000 auctions in his career: farm sales, estate sales, charity events, livestock auctions, named Nebraska Auctioneer of the Year 3 times. He built something that outlasted the farm crisis, outlasted the men who tried to stop him, outlasted every doubt anyone had ever thrown at him. But the thing Tommy became most proud of wasn't any of that. Every year, he ran free workshops for young people with speech impediments. He taught the rhythm techniques, the breathing patterns, the mental frameworks that could unlock fluency where it had never existed before. Dozens of those students went on to careers in public speaking, broadcasting, and auctioneering. He established a scholarship fund in Frank Oberlin's name that sent over 200 young auctioneers to school who couldn't otherwise have afforded it. And every August, Tommy returns to the Madison County Fair, not to compete, not to be recognized. He goes to watch the youth talent show to see if there's another kid up there, red-faced, stammering, gripping the microphone like it's the only solid thing in the world, announcing a dream that everybody else thinks is impossible. When he finds one, he introduces himself afterward. Um, my name is Tommy Wescott, he says, still stuttering after all these years, still carrying that wall in his throat, still fighting the same battle he has always fought. And then he tells them what Frank Oberlin told him once in a garage in Norfolk, Nebraska, a long time ago. Being decent doesn't pay off right away. Sometimes it takes decades, but it always pays off. And the people who laugh loudest at your dreams, they might be the ones who need you most when everything falls apart. Tommy Wescott is 84 years old now. He still stutters in conversation, still goes silent sometimes, but give him a microphone and a podium and watch what happens. The rhythm takes over, the words flow, and for a few hours, the stuttering boy from Madison County becomes the most commanding voice in any room he enters. He never became a singing telegram. As Gerald Hutchkins once suggested, he became something better. He became proof that the things that make us different might be the very same things that make us extraordinary, that the obstacles we face might actually be the path we're meant to walk, that the people who laugh loudest at our dreams are sometimes the ones who need us most when everything falls apart. And he became a reminder to everyone who has ever been mocked, dismissed, or told they don't belong, that the last laugh is always worth waiting for, even if it takes 8 years, even if it takes a lifetime.